were never too sensitive. You were simply tuned into frequencies that others had long ago learned to mute. But when you were young, too young to understand emotional nuance, you were handed a lens, a distorted one. And through it, you were taught to view your feelings not as signals, but as liabilities. You cried, perhaps not even loudly, but honestly, and they flinched, or sighed, or walked away. Stop crying. Why are you being so dramatic? You're too sensitive. And so you flinched too, but inwardly. You didn't stop feeling, you just stopped showing it. You told yourself it was maturity. You started using words like overreaction to police your own instincts. You measured your emotions against their comfort level and always found yourself in excess. But let's pause here. What if that wasn't growth? What if it was fragmentation? Carl Jung once said, "The most terrifying thing is to accept oneself completely." But how could you accept yourself when the very parts that made you human were treated as flaws? So, piece by piece, you toned yourself down. You diluted your sadness so it wouldn't make the room heavier. You clipped the wings off your joy so it wouldn't make others feel small. You learned to perform just enough warmth to avoid rejection, enough detachment to seem mature. This isn't emotional regulation. It's emotional self-erasure. And here's the deeper truth. You were never given the tools to understand what you were actually feeling, because the people around you were never taught how to sit with their own. This is what psychologists call emotional neglect. Not loud, not violent, but subtle, quiet. The absence of attunement, the absence of witnessing. You weren't coddled. You were dismissed, not because your needs were invalid, but because they were inconvenient. And so you internalized it. You became your own suppressor. Your nervous system adjusted. Your voice softened. You stopped asking to be held because experience told you you wouldn't be. But here's the shift. What if your sensitivity was never the problem? What if it was a compass? Because sensitivity, true sensitivity, is not fragility. It is perception. It is your capacity to notice the emotional climate others ignore, to feel the tremors before the earthquake, to sense the unsaid in a room full of noise. It is, in a word, intelligence, but not the kind they rewarded, the kind that scared them because it saw too much, too clearly. Nietzsche once wrote, "No one lies so boldly as the man who is indignant," and many of the people who dismissed your sensitivity did so not because they were right, but because they were defending the lies they told themselves to survive. You were not too much. They were too unprepared. You were not too emotional. They were too emotionally unavailable. And now that you're here, older, more conscious, you get to re-examine the lens they gave you. Not to blame them, but to reclaim yourself. Because beneath the armor you built to survive is someone still aching to be seen in full color, not half-felt, not dulled, but whole. You can still picture the room, the dinner table meticulously set, the living room dimly lit, the car rides quiet except for the hum of tires meeting asphalt. No yelling, no chaos, but no warmth either. It wasn't the kind of silence that calms you. It was the kind that makes your body whisper. Don't disturb anything. Don't be too much. Don't need too loudly. Not all emotional wounds are carved in volume. Some are etched in what was never said. You were never explicitly told to hide your feelings, but somehow you learned. You learned that sadness made people uncomfortable, that anger made them defensive, that joy, if too bright, might provoke jealousy or be dismissed as childish. So you adjusted. You began to perform stability, to mimic emotional neutrality, to rehearse small talk when your chest was caving in, to give rehearsed answers like, "I'm fine," because anything else was too much of a risk. And here's the thing, no one tells you. You can grow up in a good home and one with food in the fridge, birthdays remembered, school fees paid, and still walk through life emotionally starved. Because emotional neglect doesn't look like conflict. It looks like absence in the presence of people, like being surrounded but not seen, heard but not felt. Psychologists call it the unspoken void. Carl Jung might have called it shadow making, the quiet exiling of parts of you that didn't seem welcome, the part that wanted to cry, the part that wanted to scream, the part that just wanted to be held without having to earn it. Over time, you stopped bringing those parts into the room. You tucked them behind your smile. You convinced yourself that not needing much was a virtue, that being low maintenance made you stronger, more lovable. But the truth, the price of being easy to love, was becoming hard to know, even to yourself. Because when your feelings go unmirrored long enough, they begin to lose their form. You no longer trust them. You no longer trust you. You start asking others how you should feel. You crave their validation to grant your experience legitimacy. And yet, beneath all of that performance is a very old ache. The ache of never having had your emotional reality reflected back to you with gentleness. Seneca once said, "Sometimes even to live is an act of courage." And for the emotionally neglected child, it's true. Because when your inner world is unrecognized, you begin to question its worth. So you shapeshift. You become agreeable, predictable, pleasant. But no child should have to earn safety through perfection. No child should have to moderate their authenticity to maintain peace. And if you did, that silence wasn't your fault. That emptiness wasn't your creation. It was the emotional inheritance of those who never learned the language of attunement, those who didn't know how to say, "I see you, all of you, and none of it is too much." So now, years later, when someone asks how you feel and you freeze, not because you don't want to answer, but because you genuinely don't know, understand. That confusion is not proof of emotional incompetence. It is proof of emotional deprivation. You were never too sensitive. You were just unheard for so long that your sensitivity forgot it had a place to land. But the fact that you are here, revisiting the silence, naming the void, listening for the feelings beneath your numbness, that is not weakness. That is reclamation. And it begins not by blaming the house you were raised in, but by building one within yourself where your emotions are finally allowed to speak. Even the loud ones, even the messy ones, even the ones that never found a room before. Because now you are the one who gets to say, "There's space for your inner world here." So you became what they needed. Before you even had the words for it, you learned how to shapeshift. You became the good kid, the overachiever, the emotionally low-maintenance one, the one who never made things harder than they already were. You learned to read the temperature of a room faster than you could feel your own pulse, to anticipate moods, soften truths, rearrange your tone like furniture in a house that wasn't yours. Not because you wanted to deceive anyone, but because you didn't feel like you had another option. This wasn't manipulation. This was survival. When your emotions don't feel safe enough to be felt, they become signals to manage rather than experiences to live. So, slowly, subtly, you split. One part of you stayed above ground, present, agreeable, responsive to what others needed. The other part of you, the raw, unfiltered, unapproved version, was locked away, stored in the basement of your own body, too tender for exposure, too chaotic for approval, too honest to be allowed. And with each passing year, this split wasn't just a response. It became routine. And then, identity. Until one day, without even realizing it, you stopped asking what you felt and started asking what would keep the peace. You stopped wondering what was true for you and instead tried to decode what would be acceptable. Carl Jung called this the construction of the persona, a mask we wear to meet the world while our true self waits behind it, increasingly unknown even to us. And here's the most disorienting part. It worked. People liked you. You were admired, seen as responsible, competent, thoughtful. But no one ever noticed the quiet ache under your composure. No one noticed that your high-functioning nature was born from hypervigilance, not peace. Because when your childhood adversity is silence, your proving ground becomes internal. Seneca once said, "No man is more unhappy than he who never faces adversity, for he is not permitted to prove himself." But what if your adversity wasn't war, but emptiness, not chaos, but emotional invisibility? Then your proving becomes a lifelong pursuit of evidence that you're real, that your feelings count, that your pain isn't just an overreaction, that there's something valid in your internal weather, even if no one ever learned how to name the seasons with you. So you keep trying to feel seen without being too much, trying to be honest without sounding dramatic, trying to connect without losing your shape. But it's hard to speak a language of emotion when no one ever taught you the alphabet. So instead you become fluent in suppression. You rehearse stoicism not as a virtue, but as a shield. Not the kind Marcus Aurelius meant, born from wisdom and detachment, but a brittle kind, born from fear of being misunderstood. Because deep down, you still fear what will happen if you take off the mask, if you stop adjusting, stop performing, stop compensating. And yet, the real you is still there, not broken, not dramatic, just buried, waiting for something deeper than applause, waiting for recognition. Because healing doesn't begin when you're validated by others. It begins the moment you validate yourself without waiting for permission. It's not about proving your feelings anymore. It's about coming home to them, one slow breath at a time. There are moments where your body speaks before your mind does. Before you even register a threat, your chest tightens. Before you say something honest, your stomach churns. Before you ask for something small, support, space, clarity, your throat constricts as if the words are too expensive to afford. You wonder if you're just being irrational, too sensitive, too much. But these aren't overreactions. They're undigested truths, responses that never found resolution, reactions without a past tense. Because the body doesn't speak in logic, it speaks in sensation. It stores every moment your nervous system felt abandoned, even when your conscious mind moved on. This is what Bessel van der Kolk meant when he wrote, "The body keeps the score." You can convince yourself that you're safe, that things are different now. But your body only knows what it felt, not what it was told. It remembers the emotional labor you performed as a child, how you held space for everyone else's chaos while being told you were resilient. It remembers being dismissed, not overtly, but through micro-denials. "You're fine. Don't be so dramatic. It's not a big deal." So now, even in your adult life, when you finally give yourself permission to speak, to need, to express, your body resists. Not because it doubts your right to feel, but because it's still negotiating its right to exist without penalty. Marcus Aurelius said, "You have power over your mind, not outside events." But what happens when your mind agrees with him and your body still trembles? You realize that strength isn't just mental fortitude. It's somatic permission, the allowance to feel what was once forbidden, because your fear is not always about now. It's often an echo of a room that once made you shrink, of a look that silenced you, of a love that only felt available when you were easy, quiet, adaptable. This is why healing is not just cognitive, it's cellular. You don't just need new beliefs, you need new experiences, new bodily memories, moments where you speak up and the sky doesn't fall, moments where you disappoint someone and they stay, moments where you say, "I'm not okay," and you are still loved. This is the slow, sacred process of somatic rewriting, of teaching your body that the war is over, that it no longer has to freeze to stay invisible, no longer has to fawn to stay safe. Carl Jung once said, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate." Your body holds the unconscious. It is the archive of every emotional contract you were too young to sign, but signed anyway. And so now, gently, patiently, you begin the work of revising those contracts, not through force, but through presence, through breath, through moments where you finally give yourself the thing you always needed: safety, not in spite of your feelings, but within them. Because you don't need to fight your body anymore. You need to listen to it, hold it, reassure it. Not everything that feels overwhelming is a sign that something's wrong. Sometimes it's a sign that something is finally surfacing. And that's not a failure. That's progress. So what now? You begin, not by fixing yourself, but by grieving. And not just the obvious wounds, but the silent absences, the support that never came, the warmth that should have been instinctive but felt earned, the space to be loud, soft, complex, without shrinking to stay accepted. You grieve not because you are broken, but because you are remembering what you were forced to forget. And that grief, it's not regression, it's restoration. You're not falling apart. You're reclaiming the parts that had to hide, the parts that were shamed for being too tender, too reactive, too dramatic. You see, sensitivity was never your flaw. It was your compass, your capacity to detect what others denied, to feel beneath the noise, to absorb the emotional temperature of a room before a word was spoken. That's not fragility. That's intelligence of the emotional kind. But no one taught you to honor it. Instead, you were taught to silence it, distrust it, apologize for it. You were told to toughen up, to let things go, to not let it get to you. But what they called getting to you was really getting to the truth, and that made them uncomfortable. As Arthur Schopenhauer said, compassion is the basis of morality. And if you were born sensitive, it means you were born with the seed of deep compassion. Your problem was never that you felt too much. It's that you were surrounded by people who felt too little, or were too defended to admit that they felt at all. And so, your reclamation starts with this truth. You were not too sensitive. You were under-acknowledged, under-attuned, taught to carry the weight of emotional intelligence in a world that refused to name it. And now, the task isn't to abandon your sensitivity, but to protect it, to rebuild trust with it, to say to it gently, "I'm sorry I left you outside the door just to survive. You're welcome home now." Because emotional neglect is not just about what was done. It's about what was missing, and you can mourn that. You should mourn that, but let grief be a portal, not a prison. A rite of passage back to your original self, the one who knew how to feel without shame. The one who didn't just sense others, but longed to be sensed in return. This is how you reclaim it, by no longer apologizing for the depth you carry, by no longer making yourself small to be palatable, by no longer internalizing the blindness of others as your own distortion. Alan Watts once said, "We cannot be more sensitive to pleasure without being more sensitive to pain." Sensitivity is not the problem. It's the price of perception and the seed of wisdom. So don't let the emotionally blind convince you. To doubt your sight, you saw what they denied, you felt what they numbed, you remember what they've buried. And now, you reclaim not just your emotions, but your right to feel them fully, because what you feel is not too much. It's the truth, raw and radiant. And finally, it's time to trust it. You don't need to explain your feelings to deserve them. You don't need to translate your pain into perfect sentences for it to be real. You don't need to decorate your wounds just to make them palatable. Because being human was never supposed to be a performance. You are allowed to be affected, to tremble without justifying the tremble, to cry without knowing why, to feel even when it doesn't make sense to anyone else. You are allowed to exist outside the framework of logic, because not everything that is real can be measured, named, or neatly explained. Some truths live in the body. Some truths only emerge when you're still enough to feel them rise. And you've been still for a long time, but not in peace, in suppression, You've been silencing the parts of you that tremble, ache, speak out of turn, not because they were wrong, but because the world around you wasn't ready for their clarity. Because that's what sensitivity is, not weakness, clarity. A felt sense of the world, an embodied alertness, a radar for dishonesty, disconnection, and dissonance. And of course it hurt, because clarity always does, when you're surrounded by distortion. But here's the truth. Most people won't say out loud, you weren't too sensitive, you were too emotionally honest for an emotionally dishonest world. Carl Jung once said, people will do anything, no matter how absurd, to avoid facing their own soul. You didn't avoid it. You felt it. You carried it. You bore witness to it, even when no one else did. And if that made you uncomfortable, if that made them uncomfortable, it was never a reflection of your flaw. It was a reflection of their fear, because emotion, raw, unfiltered emotion, terrifies people who were taught to survive through suppression. But you've spent a lifetime numbing to fit in, numbing to stay safe, numbing to be lovable. And now the numbness is cracking, and it should, because numbness isn't peace, it's exile, a disconnection from the most intimate parts of yourself. You were never meant to be neutral. You were meant to feel, to weep when something matters, to shake when something's not right, to speak, even when your voice wavers. You were meant to know yourself beyond the expectations, beyond the adaptation, beyond the roles you've played to be acceptable. You were meant to come home to yourself, unsilenced. As Epictetus once reflected, freedom is the only worthy goal in life. It is won by disregarding things that lie beyond our control. And emotions, your emotions, were never the enemy. They were never proof of instability. They were proof that you never stopped caring, that the world didn't erode your soul, only made you tuck it away. But now you get to unlearn the silence. You get to say, I feel this, even when no one understands. You get to feel without defending the right to feel. That is the work. That is the liberation. Because this isn't just about emotional expression. It's about emotional sovereignty, the radical act of owning your inner world without apology, without dilution, without translation. It's saying, I don't owe you my silence to earn your comfort. I don't owe you my detachment to be seen as strong. I don't owe you a smile to prove I'm okay. And if that shakes things, let it shake. Because the goal was never to be unshakable. The goal was to be real. So here you are, feeling again. Hurting, yes, but this time not alone. This time, you are not abandoning yourself to maintain peace that cost you your voice. This time, your sensitivity is not a liability. It is your lighthouse. It is the signal that says, I'm here, I'm home, I feel, and I'm allowed to. This time, the permission does not come from others. It comes from you. Welcome home.